sermon revolves around Paul's letter to the Corinthians, first letter, chapter 13, which is known sort of as the love chapter. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. For now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. A few weeks ago, I officiated at the wedding of two members of EMS who I used to work with when I was a chaplain. And at the last minute, the bride reminded me that she had forgotten to tell me to include a reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, of course. So we fit it into the service, and I read it, and I looked at the gathered wedding was outdoors, and everyone was smiling and happy to hear that. It was the perfect wedding reading, romantic, beautiful, timeless. The problem is that Paul wasn't writing about weddings. In fact, he wasn't writing to people who even liked each other very much. He was writing to the church in Corinth, a congregation divided by arguments, jealousy, lawsuits, pride, and competition. They were fighting over who was the most important, whose spiritual gifts mattered most, who belonged to whom. It was a church in conflict. Into that conflict, Paul did not write a poem about romance. He wrote a lesson about Christian living. Unfortunately, when we hear the word love, we almost immediately think of a feeling. I love my husband, I love my wife, I love my children, I love my dog, I love pizza, I love God. In English, one little word carries all those meanings, but Greek is more precise. Paul would have used the word agape, which does not primarily describe an emotion. It does not even describe emotions or feelings. It describes a way of living, a contribution to seek another's best good. The closest English word to agape is love, although in the King James Version and older translations, they use the word charity, which in some ways may be more appropriate. That's why Paul's description sounds different when you think about it. Notice something, Paul never defines love. He never says what love is, he says what love does. And that's always a little troubling in English because we don't think of love doing anything. He says love is patient, love is kind, love is not arrogant, love is not rude. Those are not feelings, those are choices. Perhaps we have misunderstood this chapter because we've been asking the wrong question. We ask, how do I feel? Paul asks, how do you choose to treat the people God has placed in your life? That changes everything. It also explains something Jesus said that has puzzled Christians for centuries. Jesus said, love your enemies. If love is merely a feeling, that command seems impossible. No one can simply decide to feel affection for an enemy just like that. But if Jesus was speaking of agape, then the command becomes understandable. He's not asking us to admire our enemies. He's not asking us to approve of what they do. He's asking us to choose not to answer hatred with hatred, to choose justice instead of revenge, to choose mercy instead of cruelty, to recognize that even the person standing against us remains a child of God. That is agape. It is love expressed through action rather than emotion. You know, over the years, people often come to priests, ministers, and say, I need advice. I just don't love my wife or my husband or that person anymore. Usually they mean the feelings have disappeared, and perhaps they have. Feelings come and go. They always have. But Paul's understanding of agape, love, was never dependent upon feelings. There are days when kindness is easy. There are days when patience comes naturally. There are days when forgiveness seems almost effortless. Then there are days when every one of those things is difficult. Those are precisely the days when agape matters most. Christian love is not measured by what we feel, but by what we do. That is what Christ demonstrated. Jesus did not merely speak about love, he lived it. Even from the cross, he prayed, Father, forgive them. That is love. Today, we also gather to remember Lorraine. Whenever we gather to remember someone we love, it is natural to think about what made that person special. So today, I invite you to think about Lorraine through Paul's words. When did you see patience in her life? Where did you see kindness? Where did you see generosity? Where did you see forgiveness? Where did you see someone who quietly sought the good of others? I think we all saw that in Lorraine regularly. I met her first at St. Peter's and then here. I was on the board with her. She was a charming, interesting woman. And I knew her mostly towards the end of her life, and she declined some. But I will tell you one story that I don't think is violating any real confidences. She called me one day in the dead of winter, I think maybe during the pandemic, quite upset. And if you knew Lorraine, she had a quite heavy West Indian accent, so understanding her was a challenge anyway. And she was really upset. And she was talking about that something wouldn't speak to her anymore. And I couldn't quite get it. And after she went on, she finally explained she got out in the yard of Fleming House and gathered some tree branches that looked like people. You know, what tree branches often do, like stick figures. But she only had one wig form to use as a head. So that one could speak to her, but the rest of them couldn't. And I'm thinking, now, what do I do now? I mean, I was a junior minister back then. I said, well, she's in a safe place. So if she's having some delusions, that's not the end of the world. There were dolls to her. She was lonely. She was isolated at the time. So she was creating this little fantasy world in the garden. And she said she needed heads for these dolls. So I ordered a bunch of wig forms for her. I had the styrofoam ones that they're hard to find nowadays, by the way. But being an ex-drag queen, I knew where to get them. And I ordered them for her and sent them to her. She was so happy. She got them a few days later. And she made her dolls, and they kept her company for the remainder of that time frame. And it was such a loving thing. It was so childlike, but not childish. And it so represented her sort of approach to loving. She could love she wanted these things around her to share love with. And I thought it was a wonderful thing. And it was a wonderful experience. A little frightening at first, but when I finally understood what wasn't talking to her, then it was easy. But she really was that kind of a charming person who saw the best in everyone and lived a life of love. Long after words are forgotten, people remember how they were treated. One of the greatest legacies any one of us can leave is for people to remember how they were treated by us. And when he ends the chapter by saying, and now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love, not because love is the strongest emotion, not because love makes life easy, but because love, agape, is the very character of God. Faith will one day become sight, hope will one day be fulfilled, but the life of self-giving love belongs not only to this world, but to God's eternal kingdom. That's why it never ends. My prayer is that when people remember us the way we remember Lorraine, they will not first remember our accomplishments, our careers, or even our successes. May they remember they encountered patience, they encountered kindness, they encountered mercy, that they encountered someone who reflected, however imperfectly, the love of Christ. That is the life Paul calls us to. That is the life Jesus lived. And I believe that is the life to which Lorraine pointed us as well. Amen.